Welcome back, everybody. I'd like to now invite the City of Cedar Rapids Council Member Scott Olson to the stage to introduce our next presenter. The City of Cedar Rapids is a gold sponsor of this morning's program. Manufacturing is the backbone of the Cedar Rapids economy. The City of Cedar Rapids is committed to providing support and services to help our local manufacturing companies succeed. Scott, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, John. I'm excited to be here on behalf of Mayor Brad Hart and the entire City Council. I am very pleased to be able to introduce our next presenter, Rue Patel, former plant manager and supply chain director at General Mills, Cedar Rapids. As Iowa's #1 manufacturing city, it was great to see a recent CBJ article that noted a positive sign for the General Mills Cedar Rapids plant. As sales in the company's U.S. meals and baking division grew 31%, and the U.S. cereal division grew 10%. The company produces a wide range of products in Cedar Rapids, including fruit snacks, ready-to-eat cereals, frostings, and just recently announced plans to invest another $3,700 million to update a production line at the facility. And I know many of these efforts were the result of Rue and his team members in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Rue began his career at General Mills in 1991. Through a series of roles across North America supply chain, he went on to lead General Mills' largest manufacturing facility, which is in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. Rue subscribes to the philosophy in which every opportunity. He is intentional in seeking out examples of great leadership. While leveraging these experiences with his own, he is asked frequently to speak and lead workshops on leadership like he is today. He led the development of a highly acclaimed boot camp for first-level leaders and enjoys being an active facilitator and developer of talent. Rue just recently retired from General Mills this May, and we are fortunate to have him with us today to share the benefit of his experience of 33 years in manufacturing. With that, I'm excited to turn the mic over.
Hey, we're back. Apologize for the network connection issue that we had. So just going to go back to the slide we have here around my backdrop. There we go. So quick backdrop. Started my career after a career working at Pepsi-Cola at General Mills, second shift, making fruit by the foot. And what a great job. You got to make fruit by the foot, work with super cool people with some crazy technology that existed nowhere but in our facility in Cedar Rapids. And soon I was asked to go to Buffalo, New York, be the ops manager out there and learn how to run a cereal business. New adventure for me as well. Completely different culture, completely different building, completely different city. Who wants to move to Buffalo? Didn't want to go. Well, Buffalo turned out to be a wonderful place for me and my family. A great plant, can-do people, worked hard, really cared about what they did. And it was a really good career choice for me, even though I didn't want to go. Try it. It might work out well. Quick stint in HR or at headquarters followed, and I had a chance to work on an R&D team, reinventing how we make cereal packaging at General Mills. And as you can see, that didn't change a whole lot in 40 years. You're still eating cereal out of the same kind of box you had years ago, but tons of lessons were learned through a failure. And those lessons included a team that kind of put together 17 patents and earned them and reinvented how we package cereal in our plants at General Mills. Really a good team to be part of. But my heart was in the plants, and I knew I needed to get back to the facilities. Had a chance to go back to Buffalo, New York as a plant manager there. And then 4 years later, was really privileged and honored to be able to be brought back to Cedar Rapids, where I started my General Mills career and had the opportunity to lead this facility for 15 years. What a great, great opportunity with some amazing people. And we, in that period of time, almost doubled the output of that facility in our 15 years. And I'm very, very proud of the team I got a chance to work with, and the folks that kind of flowed through the facility were just incredible. After that, I spent 4 months working on, well, this thing called COVID. It hit us in March or February, and I was on the global COVID task team for General Mills. And it was a completely different world for me. It was a team on Zoom, like most of you are right now. And we worked on all kinds of protocol with COVID. We were learning about this disease, we were learning about the spread, we were learning about it, and every week the story changed. And we had to be super nimble about things like leave policy, pay policy, masking. How do you open a Haagen-Dazs store in China? and I'd never been to one. How do you shut down a plant if you had to? How do you do contact tracing? That was new to all of us back then. So really a cool learning opportunity for me. A lot of fun, pretty intense, 24/7 because it was a global team. But I really appreciated that opportunity. And then I had a chance to retire. But as I go back to my retirement, I learned something every day in my career at General Mills and in my career at Pepsi-Cola and in my life. And learning for me is really important. As Scott alluded, every opportunity is a learning opportunity, and every interaction certainly is one. So I learned a lot about, hey, what do you do? And what don't you do? Maybe more important than what you do. How do you treat people? And I watched people, and I observed, and I took notes. And I talked to my kids who came back from hockey practice. We talked about, well, how did that go? How did that feel? What would you do if that was you? And we put ourselves in predicaments and situations that were different. But I try to encourage my kids, and I try to encourage my team at work to keep learning about how you show up as a leader, how you show up as a teammate, how you participate, how you drive things, how you treat other people, and how you don't treat other people. But I'm going to try and whittle this thing down to 5 themes that I have to share with you today. First theme would be build your brand and build your reputation. The reputation is earned. It's not one that you say you're going to be and go do it. You have to fight for it, and you have to fight for it every day. So you see a quick a slide. I really took a photograph intentionally of my dry erase board before I retired. You'll see my operating principles in there, and that's kind of my brand. My brand started with deliver great results and treat people extraordinarily well. Pretty simple statement, maybe not so easy to do. And the principles around that brand were be accountable, live good values every day, be kind to other people, be loyal, and then win. Win because we're in a competitive workplace, internally to General Mills and externally with our competitors. You have to win to keep people employed, have to win to keep the place growing, and you have to win to keep people engaged. I took that picture for a couple of reasons. One is as I walked out of my office into the plant floor or into the office area, I always looked at this thing. And I looked at it as a reminder to myself of, hey, Rue, you're not perfect, but do some of this stuff when you're out there, right? And then when I came back a couple hours later, I'd look at this thing again and say, dude, did you do any of that? And sometimes I didn't. And sometimes I did. But it held me accountable to the standard of a brand that I wanted to live up to. And so having a brand and a reputation is never about perfection. It's about striving to set some boundaries, some values, and living those values on a daily basis. It's how I show up. And people don't care how I show up when things are good. People care how I show up when things aren't so good. When there's a crisis, when there's a problem, when there's a business interruption, how is the leader going to show up? And that's what I really worked on, living that brand and being accountable, living good values, treating people well, and being kind to them. Kind is not a word that you hear in business a lot. Being kind to me is important. Being loyal and winning. I also realized that leadership was a privilege and leadership was a 24/7 adventure. And when I say adventure it means that when I'm at Applebee's and a family shows up and one of them is my employee, I need to engage with them. I need to set that role and be the model for that employee so the family can see how we interact. And it shouldn't be any different than we are at work. It should be the same, but it's with respect and dignity. It's with kindness and caring, and always saying, it's my privilege to work with Joe at General Mills. And it really was. Secondly, I think it's important to build mastery. Mastery is one of those things that you want to be the go-to person for something besides being the leader. Leaders can be altruistic, but I want to be the go-to person for something. So when there was an issue that was a particular issue in the plant, people would come to me for some support, some ideas, some solutions. I also made sure that we leveraged data as an avenue to guide decisions. You can have real data, you can have emotional data. We try to balance those two because how people feel is as important as how the real issue is. And you kind of balance those two to find things out. And so the emotional data was really important for me. People need to feel like they're being heard and listened to, valued, and their opinion mattered, even though it may be the second most important thing out there, because they're the most important thing out there, and that's our people. And then you take that mastery that you've got, and you work really hard, and I work really hard to teach things. So mastery shows up in many ways. It could be a safety leader. It could be a leader for us in pest control. It could be a leader in quality and food safety. It could be a leader in leadership. It could be a leader in a number of different things. So find your mastery, build your expertise, and bring people along for the ride. The third one I think is the most fun for me. It is helping people exceed their perceived perception. And everyone's got their ceiling. I can only do this because I only had that. or I'm not afforded to, or people don't listen or don't value. And for me, being Asian, I hear this a lot with teams I support. It's because I'm Asian. It's because I'm supposed to not say a whole lot of stuff. Well, my job was to help people exceed their perceived value and to find the real value. And I took that as a personal challenge. And it was to allow people to see what they could become and dream. And sometimes when you start a career, you're not really sure where you're going to go. You're plugging and chugging, fighting the daily battle. And my job was to say, well, I think we can do this. And I think you can do this. And to challenge them to think differently than what they were and who they were. And challenge them to get better. And challenge them to say, let's put a plan together because things don't happen in happenstance. And let's create a plan that involves bringing in tools and resources, bringing in support, sometimes bringing in a hug, sometimes it's a kick. It's getting them moving in the direction that they need to go when sometimes they don't even realize it. Sometimes you're speaking up on their behalf in groups, giving them support, and then celebrating like crazy the accomplishments they have. So one of the things I'm most proud of at General Mills in 33 years is that today, 1/3 of our supply chain leaders in the plants have worked on my teams at some point. Now, I'll be very honest. Some survived, some flourished, right? So I'm not taking credit for all this stuff. But I'm really proud that I had a say in them. And on my retirement dinner, which was done on Zoom, a lot of folks said some really kind things about me. And I felt good about helping them. I felt really good about helping them. I believe you do some of that by surrounding yourself with people that are better than you. Not easy to do, but I believe that everybody I hang out with, whether it's at work or outside of work, is better than me in something. It's my opportunity to learn from them. It's my opportunity to get better. If I'm like the best of that group, I don't get better, right? And so I think about these things quite a bit. My A team forces my A game, and the B team would let me settle for my B game. And I want my A game to be out there, and it creates opportunities. So it has forced me to step up into conversations I may not have been comfortable in. It has forced me to learn some things that I may not have been quite privy to learn or quite able to learn or didn't think it was important. But it helps me really strive for things that were better. And again, every interaction is a learning opportunity. It forced me to learn. So I have a picture of a young man over here named Coach Wooden. And Coach Wooden and I became pretty good friends before he passed away. And I was privileged to spend 5 years with him developing his leadership academy for business. But when I sat with Coach Wooden, I just sat and listened. I just listened. I paid attention. I looked at his behavior. I watched how he treated people. I thought about philosophically how he approached things in some pretty tough times in the 50s and 60s and how he approached things today. And I learned about his mission, his values, and I tried to incorporate some of those things into mine. And clearly, I was around better people. Coach was one of those folks that was humble enough that he hung around a guy who was a little bit not so good as he was, which was me. But you do that by bringing people up, and Coach is bringing me up. And so part of my mission is to bring people up with me, and hanging out with those folks who are better than me forces me to do it, but also forces me to work with people and get them to be their A player. And sometimes they don't realize that. Finally, I'd like to share with you a quick message around standing for something. Then I have a couple of stories to tell. So in today's day, more important than ever, stand for something. Like, know that you've got an opinion. As a leader in the business, leader in your community, have an opinion, share that opinion, and make a difference. It's okay to sit with a group of friends and have an opinion, right? Well, what happened? What changed? And if nothing changed, well, you did nothing, but maybe get a group of people riled up. So go do something and make a difference. Stand for something. And make sure that your employer's values line up with yours, because if you don't, you're always going to be in conflict with where you are and who you are as a person. So a couple examples. So I believe strongly in pay equity, and I believe strongly in allowing people of color like myself and women, especially in our workplace, in manufacturing workplace, to have the ability to do whatever they want to do and be paid equitably to anybody else in the organization. So on an annual basis, I would sit down with my HR team and we'd look through the pay and the compensation for women and minority and how they stacked up. We'd look at their job performance. We'd look at their tenure. We'd look at the jobs and experiences they brought in. And we'd have a very frank conversation about why they were paid their worth. And I'm really proud to say that at the General Mills plant in Cedar Rapids, we did not have a pay equity issue between men, women, people of color, And we monitored that on a daily basis or on an annual basis. It was important for us to go do that. Now, that wasn't a General Mills edict to go do that. And General Mills, I believe, is very, very good at it. But we forced that to happen. We forced that to be very transparent and to be very honest about how we manage pay and equity in our workplace. Equity goes beyond pay, right? Equity also deals with the types of jobs people got and the promotional opportunities they had, and pushing people in networks that they may not be aware of that give them the opportunities to learn and be around people where they can grow and aspire their teams. I also made sure that as our young people came out of college into our management programs, I spent time with each and every one of them. And it could be that we had a get together at our home and made it really personal, or it could be that we schedule time on a biweekly basis to pay attention to those folks, because that generation is a whole lot different than I am and a whole lot different than most of us are, and they have needs. And while we like to dismiss those things a little bit, millennials, that sort of stuff, their needs are real. And to understand those needs and to create an environment and workplace where they can flourish and bring their best game was really, really important for us. And the way you do that is to take down boundaries, open the doors, and let them sit and have conversations, honest conversations with you. I also made a point to get to know their parents, so you know what some of their baseline is. So when I say stand for something, it is I'm standing for development of people. I'm standing for minorities in our workplace. I'm standing for women in our workplace around pay equity, opportunity, and not just saying we stand for it, but we're going to create developmental opportunities, and we're going to create methods for them to move through that chain and do better things in their life. And I always tell people at the end of the day, it's like, go do great things because you're capable of doing them. You may not know it yet, but go do great things because you're capable of doing them. And finally, I'd like to talk a little bit about the Asian Leader Network that I supported at General Mills. And I was a guest speaker. Even after I retired, they asked me to come back and share some things with them. But very, very privileged, quite frankly, to be asked. But it was a great example setting for me in terms of people who were of Asian descent that came into an organization in Minneapolis that said, I'm not sure I fit. Or, you know, I had a great idea, but I didn't feel comfortable sharing it in a meeting. And I had to figure out how to do that stuff. I'm not sure I belong, or, hey, I'm not getting promoted because I'm Asian. And to give them the ability to lead their own career, to drive that, to build a community of mentorship and support, and open doors for them so they could go do great things like anybody else could, was really important for me and passionate for me. And that's a group at General Mills, even though I'm retired, I will continue to stay with and help support. So very quickly, I sent 5 messages out in terms of things that, you know, I learned in manufacturing. I learned hundreds of lessons. I got to interact with thousands of amazing people. And I will truly say that that experience at General Mills changed my life, formed who I am as a leader, formed who I am as a human being, and really made a difference for me personally. And I think I made a difference back. So you measure yourself in a number of ways. And I talked about my values a while back, and the picture you saw off my bulletin board of being accountable. Let me give you a quick story of that. I was working at Pepsi-Cola as a supervisor on second shift. My partner, Joe, had a habit of, we'd walk in the locker room together. We worked long hours. We'd walk in and we'd change. He'd look in the mirror and say, hey, did I do my best for my team today? And we always said, yeah, we did. We worked hard, we're covered with syrup and that sort of stuff. And we'd change and walk out. And there was a day that it was probably 3 a.m, so it was several hours after shift was over. Went back in the locker room, changed. He looked in the mirror, did his normal stuff. We were exhausted. He looked at himself and said, I don't think I did. I'm like, dude, what are you talking about? This was years ago and left an incredible mark on me. I don't think I gave my team my best. Oh boy, well, what now? We put our uniforms back on, went back on the floor and tagged up with the third shift guy and said, hey, we left you a little bit of a mess and we're going to stick around and clean it for a couple hours. Wow. Being accountable. Measuring yourself to be accountable was a lesson I learned when I was 22 years old and never forgot it. So find that lesson that you can resonate with, bring people along with you, and do something that you stand for and go make a difference. With that, I'll take any questions. And we've got a couple questions. You are now helping smaller companies. What have you learned about yourself and the difference between big and small companies? Well, let me just say it as a consultant now, helping smaller companies is something I really look forward to doing. You kind of get to work without the constraints of a big corporation, so that's awesome. But the things that we've learned running a plant in Cedar Rapids, a $2 billion a year plant, can come into play to help smaller companies. More than anything else, they learn not to make the mistakes that I've made. And because I had a group of supporting people and a corporation behind me, you could make some of those mistakes, and smaller companies can't afford them. But providing them insight on leadership, providing them insight on coaching, on building strategies, on delivering continuous improvement is something that's a lot of fun. And you can truly walk out of a small business and feel like you look like help. And looking like help is pretty cool. In a big business, in a big company, sometimes you kind of get lost and you get in the minutia. But in a small company, if you didn't look like help, you're going to feel it. And if you look like help, well, you're going to know it and feel pretty good about it as well. So great question there. So here's a trick question. Oh my. How do you reconcile the current political environment with your business management approach? Whew. This could be a rat hole. So the current political environment is a mess. And quite frankly, it's embarrassing to me. And I'm not going to speak on anyone's behalf but myself. But the business approach that I have is based on values, based on positivity, based on making a difference, and bringing people along to do good things. So you can judge whether that's part of the current political environment or not. And I will say that regardless of what happens out there and what's been happening, I'm sticking true to my roots because that's what I'm comfortable with. And so I'd encourage you that as we are in this mess, and it's not going to get a whole lot easier for a few weeks and may not get easier for a while, find who you are and figure out who you are and what you do and why you make a difference in your business, in your community, in your life, in your family, and go do what's important to you. And I'll always say, if you develop yourself with a brand, and if you develop yourself with some operating principles like I shared with you, you lead yourself to a place where you can sleep at night and feel pretty good about yourself. I think I artfully dodged that trick question. One more question. Any suggestions on books, formal education, opportunities for middle managers? I will say that I handed out several hundred books that Coach Wooden wrote. It's called the Blue Book. It's a lifelong experience of learning on and off the court. It's just called the Blue Book. It's the first book that Coach Wooden wrote with Steve Jameson, and it's an anecdotal book, so it's an easy read. It's got several stories in there and lessons I learned through stories. So I'm not a big reader in terms of academia stuff, but I like hearing stories and I like to be able to relate to some of those stories. So one of those goes back to one that Coach Wooden and I shared at his place in LA around race. And I said, Coach, I don't understand what you had to do with race and breaking the color barrier. And he said, Rue, I was coaching a college team in Indiana, and we had a chance to go to the national championship playoff, which was in New York City, and we had an African-American player on our team. And they called me and said, you can come, but you can't bring him. And we chose not to go. And the next year we were that good again. They called and said, you can come, but you can't bring him. And they said, we're not going to do that again. And they said, well, we really need you here, Coach, because you're one of the best teams in the country. And they said, well, you can bring him, but you can't bring his family. And we chose not to go. And making a stand back then, this was in the 50s, making a stand back there wasn't easy. It wasn't easy. But it was important to Coach to go do the right thing, to live his values. And so those are some of the stories that are in these books that I get to read. And they mean a whole lot to me more than reading about theory, because I can relate to some segment of that and some segment of that story that I heard from Coach. So I've handed out literally hundreds of those books. And I asked every employee at General Mills who got a book, had a conversation about Coach Wooden and what he meant to me. And I always told people, I say, hey, you know what? You don't need to read this book. There's no quiz coming. But if you do and you've got a cool story, well, share it with me. And I heard so many stories about, I read this book with my kids, and they made up a poster in the house around some of the principles that Coach Wooden had. And that stuff makes me feel good because it's not so much about work and forcing work down someone's throat. It's about life and family and having a better life and a better family. So great question. There's tons of leadership books. I like the ones that are anecdotal, have stories, make the reading easier, but also allows me to apply them quicker. One last question. Maybe a last question. A couple more questions. What was my biggest mistake? Oh my gosh, I made so many of them. I make a lot of mistakes, and you learn from your mistakes, and you get better from them. I've made tons of mistakes that are hiring mistakes. and hiring mistakes would be people that you felt good about, you thought you just completely missed some of the flashing red lights. I mean, sometimes a flag was waving, right? And you just missed it because you got enamored by a resume, or you got enamored by the school they went to, and you missed a basic trait. And the basic trait that I look for when I hire somebody is character. Character counts. Character matters. And when things get tough, it's character you go back to, not a degree. So I made some hiring mistakes that were pretty major. The biggest mistake I made, really the fun one, was, I got in this team to redesign the cereal carton back in 1999, and we spent millions of dollars trying to figure this thing out. And I've got a couple of these prototypes in my office at home. But we didn't make that carton. And the cereal carton you have now is the same cereal carton you had, well, before we started. And that was a big mistake. The mistake was not recognizing the inability of our contractor to own and have the technology to where it was applicable at things that we could do in a cereal production floor, which may make 1 million boxes of cereal a day from a prototype, and not recognizing that soon enough and cutting this thing off soon enough. Now, the benefit for that mistake is that we learned a ton from it. We had 17 patents from our team, and we redesigned how cereal packaging equipment worked for the better. So learning from my mistakes is always a big thing for me. And, I use a concept the coach taught me around failing forward, which is always important for me. Community, what are our expectations around community involvement? Well, community is everything. And I always said that we live in a rich community and we're a rich plant in Cedar Rapids as long as we feed each other, right? So the plant in Cedar Rapids feeds a community. So it could be volunteerism, it could be with food donations, and that plant does millions and millions of pounds of food donations a year. It could be with just writing checks to nonprofits. It could be mentoring programs. It could be getting involved with Kirkwood to kind of re-engineer a curriculum. Community involvement is really important. Helping the community brings back great employees. It's a full circle thing. It's a business proposition as well as a feel-good proposition. So taking the time to be engaged in the community, helping the community, making a difference is really important to me personally, but it's always been important to that General Mills plant in Cedar Rapids, even before I was in it, and I know that will continue in the future. For new leaders, what's the first step? I think that's something that I consult upon, and I charge a pretty hefty fee on that. So, a new leader, I was a new leader at PepsiCo, came out of Purdue, had a degree, knew everything, and got smacked around. And I couldn't figure it out. And I had this ego about having a degree that I wore with me. Well, not having an ego is pretty important. Being able to listen to your people is really, really important. Being able to learn on every opportunity, pretty critical. So leaders are made, they're not born, and they're made by the engagement they have with their folks, having some principles, and helping people along the way. But a boss in today's day doesn't work so well, but a leader is a coach. Leader is sometimes a friend. Leader sometimes, pushes people in things that they're uncomfortable doing or don't know they can do yet. A leader is a visionary, a good communicator, and a leader helps people win. And winning gets defined in many ways, like we talked about before. So I don't know if there's a first step for leader, but I would say, from my time with Coach Wooden is, you've got 2 years in one mouth. Use them accordingly. With that, I'd like to thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to do this. Thank you, John.
Well, thank you so much, Rue, and I wish we had an audience in person to give you a big round of applause. I bug Rue several times a year to have him speak at either one of our events or our Leadership Academy, and he's always been very gracious with his time, and I hope we can get him back again soon. He's a real resource and for the entire region and for the Corridor Business Journal. So thank you so much, Rue.